couple of weeks ago, we started this series, Overloaded. And we've been talking about how we tend to overload our lives. And we just, I've used some visual aids as we have started this series. And maybe you kind of feel like that. Or maybe like this, you got a little more than you can carry. I mentioned this before, I think I saw this truck go through town the other day. But maybe this is it. Maybe if you had to put your picture or your life in a word picture, maybe this picture right here would be what describes it. You may say, I feel like I'm just overloaded. I feel like I've got too much going on. And we've talked about this, and we started with a simple invitation from Jesus in the Scriptures in Matthew, and Jesus said this. He said, "Come to me, all you who are tired from carrying heavy loads, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke and put it on you, and learn from me, because I'm gentle and humble in spirit, and you'll find rest for your soul." And Jesus basically gave us these things. He said, here's the key. He said, come to me. When you're feeling overloaded, overwhelmed, when you got more on your plate than you think you can carry, he said, come to me, yoke to me, let me help you carry what you're carrying. And the third one was, learn from me. And we talked about that. Learn simply, he was just saying, trust me. Learn to trust me. Learn to share the load, to put the load on me, and learn to trust me. And the main reason that we're overwhelmed is we try to carry more than we're ever intended to carry. I know nobody in the room ever does that, but sometimes some people, they try to carry way more than they should. And we try to carry more than we can carry. We try to carry stuff that we were never intended to carry. And then last week we talked about this, is that we overload ourselves by carrying so much and trying to live way too fast. We're a fast generation. We're instant this, instant that. We have knowledge at our fingertips, and we just like to live at breakneck speed. So last week we started and we talked about 5 changes that we can make to lighten the load in our life and to slow down the pace of our life. And what's interesting is these 5 things, they're the exact opposite of what culture teaches us today. I mean, you look at each one of these things and you can just flip it around and do the exact opposite, and that's what they tell us today is popular and the way that we should live. But if we're going to slow down the pace of our life, last week we talked about this, we have to learn contentment. Learn contentment. Paul said, I've learned to be content. Whatever the circumstances in my life, he said, I've learned to be content. And he said again in Timothy, he said, the great gain is with godliness with contentment, for we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of the world. So if we have food and clothing, we'll be content with that. And we said contentment just simply means I don't need more to be happy. Contentment. True contentment is not found in having everything you want. It's found in not wanting to have everything. Learn contentment. And then the second thing we talked about was listen before speaking. I know no one here today would be guilty of this, but I know I have occasionally said things that have gotten me way overloaded, in trouble. I've said things that's just added to my plate and carried a lot of stuff I wasn't supposed to carry. Ever done that before? Maybe something you said at work, maybe something you said in a relationship with someone, maybe something you said in your house, and all of a sudden you've got all this extra load that you're having to carry because of something that you said rashly or didn't think through before you said it. And that's what James was talking about in James 1:19. He said, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. So today I want to give you the final 3 things to slow down the pace of our life. First one is this: obey the 4th commandment. Don't answer out loud, but how many of you know what the 4th commandment is? You're church people, come on. No, 4th commandment. 4th commandment. If we want to eliminate overload in our life, we've got to obey the 4th commandment. It's found in Exodus chapter 20 in verse 9. He said, you have 6 days in which to do your work, but the 7th day is a day of rest dedicated to me. God says rest is so important. I'm putting it in the Big Ten, okay? It made the Big Ten command. He said it's so important, I'm putting in that. It's called the Sabbath, which a Sabbath literally means a day of rest. A day of rest. God says, every 7 days, I want you to do one of these. Every 7 days, you need a day of rest. I thought it was interesting, they used mules back years ago when they were mining the coal mines in Pennsylvania, and they would use these mules underground. And this guy was traveling through the area, and he noticed all these fields on Sunday, and they were full of mules. They were everywhere, grazing all over the place. And he stopped and asked one of the locals, he said, "Why are all the mules out here in the field? What's the deal with all these mules on Sunday being out here in the field and not in the mines?" And the guy told me, he said, "The reason they're out here is we have to bring them up 1 day a week into the sunshine," he said, "because if we leave them down underground all the time, they'll eventually lose their eyesight." When I read that story, I thought, what a message for our culture today. We get so busy, focused on, getting it done, doing this, getting our to-do list, and we're just so focused on living life and going full speed and all this that sometimes, and maybe God knew we'd be this way, so he said, hey, sometimes you need to come up above the ground, and you just need to rest. You need to come up so you can get your focus back, and you don't go blind living this life. You see, the day is not as important as the principle. I know there's some people who would argue, okay, the Sabbath is a Sunday, or no, the Sabbath is a Saturday. And the people will argue over the technicalities, but I don't think the day is as important as the principle. He's saying 1 out of every 7 days, you need rest. In fact, Jesus said the Sabbath, you were not made to serve the Sabbath. He said the Sabbath was made to serve you. So what do we do on the Sabbath? What do you do on a day of rest? If you're like most, if we're not careful, we'll use the Sabbath to catch up on the other 6, right? Oh man, I just didn't get much done. I've got to use this day to catch up and do what I didn't get done the other 6 days. And at the end of the day, we're more tired than we were than when we started. I love a quote Billy Graham made. He said, Jesus spoke about the ox in the ditch on the Sabbath, but if your ox gets in the ditch every Sabbath, you should either get rid of the ox or fill in the ditch. Pretty profound. So what do you do on your Sabbath to actually make it a day of rest? The first thing is we rest our body. If you don't take time off, your body will make time off. If you were driving down the road and your overheat light started blinking and bells started dinging on your dash, you'd stop your car. You'd pull over. In fact, I saw someone this week, smoke was just blowing out, man, and they come through an intersection and immediately pull it off the road, and they're getting out, smoke's going everywhere. If the overheated light comes on in your car and it starts dinging, you're going to pull your car over because you don't want to do any damage or more damage to your engine. If we don't slow down by choice, circumstances will force us to slow down. George Mueller made this quote. He said that the stops of the Lord are also ordered just like the steps of the Lord. So first, we rest our body. The second thing is we recharge our emotions. Do things like just being quiet or reconnecting in some good, close, wholesome relationships. Some find this recharging in recreation. It rejuvenates them. And I'm not talking about competitive recreation, but just something that rejuvenates you. And some of you, you're not getting rejuvenated out on the golf course, okay? I'm telling you. You may be getting charged, but it's not positive charging. And you can say, well, I'm using God's name. Well, you're not using it in worship, okay? Let's just leave it at that. So it's not recharging, but you need to do something that rejuvenates you, that charges you, that refreshes your emotions. And then the last thing, we have to refocus our spirit. What does it mean to refocus our spirit? Refocus our spirit means worship. Worship. You don't take a day off from worship. If the only time you worship is when you walk in here and the band kicks off on Sunday morning, you're missing out so much. Because we're not called to a worship service, we're called to a life of worship. Why is it so important? Because worship shifts our focus from ourself to God. And worship puts life into perspective. I need time to put my life into perspective by remembering how good God is and how great God is and how He's blessed my life. I need to be alone with God. And if I'm too busy to be alone with God and to worship God, then here's the news flash. I'm too busy. If I'm too busy to do this, that's why he put us on this planet. That's what we'll do for all eternity. That's what I was created to do, was to bring worship and honor to my Creator. It's what we're here for. And if I'm going to do that, I have to intentionally shift my focus to God. I have to schedule that. I love what Psalms 127, he said, it's useless to rise early and go to bed late and work your fingers to the bone. Don't you know that God enjoys giving rest to those He loves? Now, I'm just going to tell you straight out this morning, the most spiritual thing some of you can do today when you leave this service is not go home and finish the yard work. It's not go home and finish the work you left undone in the office. The most spiritual thing that some of you can do today when you leave this service is go home, crawl up on the couch, and take a nap. Yay! Everybody said amen. No, come back, sir. Don't leave. Just take a nap. Rest your body. Just get some rest. Fourth thing, if we're going to eliminate overload in our life, pause and pray. That seems simple, doesn't it? Pause and pray before deciding. Just take 10 or 15 seconds to offer up a prayer to God for wisdom. Whether you're in the boardroom or a committee meeting or a classroom or you're talking to your kids or talking to your spouse, offer up a short prayer to God and wait. Why do we do this? Because when we stop and pray, when we pause and pray, in that pause, you get perspective. You get perspective. First and foremost, the perspective we get is, hey, He's God, I'm not. We get busy going through our day and doing our stuff, and sometimes we think we're God. And if it's meant to be, it's up to me. And we just take on that role of being God. And He said the first thing we do when we pause and pray, we get the perspective of, hey, He's God, and I'm not. It's slowing down enough to get a fresh look at things. Allowing us to stop long enough to regain and to see what we've maybe been missing. Perspective helps us make wise decisions. And James says, if anyone lacks wisdom, he said, let him ask God, who will give him the wisdom that he needs to make good decisions. We pause and pray so we can get perspective to make wise decisions. 50 years from now, people aren't going to say, hey, did Chris make quick decisions? I hope they'll say, hey, Chris made wise decisions. Don't just use the phrase, I'm praying about it. Buckle up for this one. If you use that phrase all the time, I'll pray about it, I'm praying about it. Listen to me, okay? For the most part, it's a cop-out. Okay? It's procrastination. When people tell me, when they say, well, I'll pray about it, I usually know one of two things. I either know they're looking for an excuse not to do it, or number two, they're just going to say that to get me off their back. Not everybody, but a lot of people. And some people have been praying for months and years about things that should have taken them 15, 20 seconds to make a decision on. We pray, we pause, we pray, we ask God for wisdom, and then we do it. Pause and pray before you decide. It'll help you slow down your life to a more manageable level. Proverbs 19, he said, zeal without knowledge is not good. A person who moves too quickly may go the wrong way. And Jesus says, if you'll listen to me, I'll tell you in advance. That business deal you're working on, it's a dead end. Don't pursue it. That project that it's going to be a loser. Don't bother with it. That deal you're trying to make, stop. It's not going to go anywhere. Jesus is saying, I can save you a lot of time if you'll just listen to me. If you'll stop and pause. I'm putting up signs all around you, but you're going too fast and you're missing the signs. You don't have perspective. God says, ponder before you promise and deliberate before you decide, muse before you choose, and reflect before you select. Consider carefully and prayerfully before deciding something, and that will slow down the pace of your life. And then this last one, and I saved the best to last. But this last one is trust God's timing. If you want to eliminate overload in your life, trust God's timing. If you're serious about slowing down your life, trust God's timing. If discontent is the number one cause of hurry, then probably impatience has to be right up there with it, close to it. And do you know what impatience is? Impatience is simply a lack of trust. When you're impatient, you're just basically saying, God, I don't really trust you. God, I don't really think you have my best interest at heart. God, do you know I need it now and I'm in a hurry? You see, faster is not always better. I love Ecclesiastes. He said God does everything just and what? On time. But people never completely understand what he's doing. God always does everything just right and on time. You see, God has a plan for your life, and you're sitting there going, well, hey, I already know that. I know God has a plan for my life, but did you also know God has a timetable for that plan as well? God has a timetable for your life. And here's the catch. God never explains his timetable. He never says, okay, it's going to happen way out here, and here's why, and I want you to... He doesn't explain his timetable. It's a story in the Old Testament of a 17-year-old boy, and his name was Joseph, and Joseph had this dream. He had a dream that he was going to be a ruler, that he was going to be over the land, and he was going to be this high position, and that not only would his brothers that he didn't get along with, not only would all of his brothers come and bow before him and worship him, but his mom and dad was going to worship him, and it was this great dream, and he was going to be a person of power, and he started telling that dream to everybody because he just knew it was just fixing to happen. And it didn't. The dream got him in trouble with his brothers. His brothers sold him to a band of travelers, gypsies, and they carried him into Egypt, and they sold him as a slave into a man's household, and he worked as a slave there, and things started looking better for him, and finally the master's wife accused him of rape and false charges, and he got thrown into prison, and he was in prison for 2 more years. He sat in a dungeon. He had a dream, man, of what God was going to do, and he's going to be this great leader. 13 years later, the dream is fulfilled. 17-year-old Joseph is now 30-year-old Joseph. You know, the most painful thing is when we're in a hurry and God's not. Oh, we got to have it. It's got to happen right now. We're in a hurry. But God is not. You know, part of the maturity and growing up of children is teaching them to learn the difference between no and not yet. I had to learn that. You had to learn that. Our kids have to learn that. No, that means, buddy, just mark it off. It's never going to happen. But when they would say, no, not yet, that was filed back here, and I go, okay, I can't have it right now, but it's coming. Can't have it today, but I'm going to get it. And that's what this is. Delay is not denial. And we have to learn this as followers of Christ, that God knows the right time and God knows the right way, and God's timing is perfect, and He's never, ever late. Habakkuk 2:3, he said, things that I planned, they won't happen right away. Slowly, steadily, surely the time approaches when the vision will be fulfilled. If it seems slow, wait patiently, for it will surely take place. It will not delay. Hear me this morning. That idea that you had, that vision that you had, that dream that you have, that God has given you, that hasn't happened yet, it's coming. It's coming. Delay is not denial. It's coming. It's going to be on God's schedule, but it's coming, and we have to learn to trust Him and slow down. Stop complaining. Galatians 6:9, he said, don't become weary in doing good, for at the proper time you'll reap a great harvest if you don't give up and faint. If we're going to eliminate overload in our life, we've got to slow down. Learn contentment. Listen before we speak. Observe the Sabbath. Observe the fourth commandment and rest our body, our mind, and our spirits. We need to learn to pause and pray before any decisions. And we need to learn to trust God's timing. So my question today is, what do you need help with? These are 5 things, and you can't leave here today and go, well, I'm going to go home and work on all 5 of these. No, what you need to do is just take one of them that you're struggling with and say, I'm going to go home today and I'm going to work on this area. I need to trust God's timing more, or I need to learn to rest my body, mind, and emotions. I need to learn to close my mouth and just listen more before I make any decisions. I need to pause and pray more and get God's wisdom. If you're feeling a little overwhelmed today, if you're feeling overloaded, if you're feeling stressed out, remember God's great invitation. He said, come to me, all you who are tired of carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke and put it on you and learn from me, because I'm gentle and I'm humble in spirit, and you will find, I love this, rest for your soul. Could you use some rest today? Could you use some shifting of the load today off your shoulders and onto His? That's the invitation He's given us. And perhaps, just perhaps, you're here today and you're not overloaded with just day-to-day stuff and pressures and schedules and commitments, but perhaps today you're overloaded because your soul is not at rest. Maybe you're overloaded with guilt from your past. Maybe you're overloaded with shame. Maybe you're overloaded when you start thinking about the things you've done and about a holy God, and you're just like, He could never love me, He could never use me, He could never forgive me. This same invitation applies to you today. Let me read it to you as we wrap up from the Amplified Bible. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavily burdened by religious rituals that provide no peace, and I will give you rest, refreshing your souls with salvation. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, following me as my disciple, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest, renewal, blessed quietness for your soul. For my yoke is easy to bear, and my burden is light. Whatever you need to unload today, God beckons us all. And He says, come to me, and I'll give you rest. Father, I